So I'm going to introduce Dr. Rao. Dr. Rao is our Executive Vice President at DHR Health and the President and CEO of the DHR Health Institute for Research and Development. Prior to joining DHR, he served as the Chief Academic Officer at Christus Health, and prior to that, he served as the System Vice President for Research for Ochsner Health System and Deputy Head of the University of Queensland Ochsner School of Medicine. Dr. Rao is an experienced immunologist with more than 150 peer-reviewed publications and numerous book chapters. He currently holds the position of professor at Texas A&M University and the University of Houston. He has over 4 decades of experience in leading research at various academic and non-academic institutions in the United States, and he serves as the principal investigator of numerous studies founded by the National Institutes of Health and by biopharmaceutical industry. So please welcome Dr. Rao.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I'm really excited to be here. We are hoping that this is going to be the start of our long-term partnership that actually started in summer of this year with Region 1 and it's hopefully going to continue in 2022 and beyond. So what I'm going to talk to you about is, before I start, let me just make sure that you understand. Today is not a walk in the park. This may be a field trip, and as Monica was exciting you that, hey, it's a field trip and we are going out, as the day passes, this is going to get more and more complex. We are going to provide you with information that is going to, that is very relevant to public health crisis that we are currently facing, but at the same time, different speakers, some surgeons, some physicians, some investigators are going to come and talk to you about what those public health crises are and how are you are going to help us mitigate those crises. So the complexity of the information that is going to be shared with you is going to become more and more complex as the day passes. It's very unfortunate. I am the bearer of that news because that is exactly how it's going to be. So we will start with giving you some basic concepts of why research is important, what are the public health crises, why you, why us, why we are doing this here. And then we're going to move on to some very specific diseases that are actually quite rampant in our community. So the first lecture is about the importance of medical research. And I must tell you that I'm going to use medical research and clinical research interchangeably. So just bear in mind that this is an interchangeable concept. So we will talk about this as we go. So what is the objective today? First is to highlight for you the public health crisis that exists in the Rio Grande Valley. This is your home that we are talking about. We are not talking about national, we are not talking about Houston, we are not talking about San Antonio. We are talking about you, your neighbors, and the home and the region that you live in. So we're going to focus exclusively on what are the public health crises that is going on. We keep on talking about COVID-19 as an endemic. Let me tell you, there are multiple other pandemics that are also going on, not just here in our valley, but across the nation. But they are more exaggerated here in our valley. The second is that we will underscore how you and the medical research, we working with you, could actually mitigate them, reduce those burdens, prevent them from even happening. And that is going to be our second part of my conversation with you this morning. And the third is that how are we going to involve the Hispanic community in this endeavor? We are more than 90% Hispanics here. And what mode of communication, intervention are we going to use to get them more engaged and involved in trying to mitigate? Because let me tell you, we together are a strong force, but we need the community beyond us to actually bring about some change in this public health crisis that we are facing. However, this is all good. We will actually focus on those 3 objectives. But the more important thing that we want to walk away today is this. We want you to be critical thinkers. We don't want you to be the users of Google Doctor. because this is not where the medicine is. Anytime any information is shared with you, ask yourself, is this accurate? Is this factual? Does it have any bearing on what reality is? Where is science about this? So we want you to be critical thinkers, and at the same time, we also want you to be the voice of reason. You have a profound influence within your home, within your family, within your peers. Use that influence to actually bring about a change. So I'm hoping that what you learn from us today and what we share with you, you will actually go back and share it with your peers who unfortunately could not be here, and with your parents and your friends in the family. This is extremely important. It's propagation of information that we are looking at. And I'm hoping that you're going to be a conduit for that in the days and weeks to come. So what is Rio Grande Valley? Okay, we are talking about over here, roughly 8 counties, okay, over 2 million people. Bear in mind that over 2 million people is actually South and North Dakota combined plus. We are a sizable community right here in our home, and we have to take care of ourselves. We have over 90% of people are Hispanics in this particular community, and Latinos, very different from Hispanics that sit in Miami, in South Florida. Very different genetically and also through heritage. We have some of our counties are among the poorest counties in the United States. Let me tell you, you're sitting in the Hidalgo County. 31% of people in this particular county live below the poverty line. And almost the same number is also uninsured. When you don't have insurance and you are poor, the last thing you think about is going to a doctor when you are sick, or going to a doctor for your annual exam. Putting food on the table becomes your priority. Taking care of your kids and their needs becomes your priority. So we are living with a public health crisis which is not just medical, but also socioeconomic. And when you combine medical health crisis with socioeconomic, you create a serious burden on the community. One of the things that we are facing here is that we have the highest burden of diseases. Any disease that you pick up, cancer, diabetes, obesity, liver diseases, it's actually in double digits. When I mean double digits, it means above 10%, 20%, 30%. So we are actually facing an endemic right here in front of our eyes, and we are absolutely, completely ignoring it. So just to tell you, I'm going to go over this very quickly because it's important for you to know what are the different types of research that we do. The basic science research is actually done in the laboratory. Okay, this is something that we are not going to talk about in any of our conversations today. We then have clinical research, which is what we do here at the Institute and at DHR, and this is on human clinical trials. This is called the bench, this is called the bedside. So there is constant communication between the bench and the bedside. Physicians see something that they have encountered in their patient. They go talk to the basic researchers and say, hey, I have found this. Can you investigate? The basic researcher finds something unique, comes back to and when I say basic researcher, it's not just in the bench. It's also small animal and also large animal. In baboons, in pigs, and in other large animals, the studies. They come back to the physicians and say, hey, this is what probably we can test out to see if it works. So that's called translation. And this is continuously happening. Even when I was standing over here and talking, I was talking to a kidney transplant surgeon. And we were talking about, standing right here, about using absorbable stents when we do gastric bypass or pancreatic surgeries. And he said, how can we use them? Because right now we use non-absorbable stent, which actually creates a lot of problems for the patients. So those are kinds of conversations that are constantly going back and forth that is making a progress in medical sciences. The third is actually the standard of care. So once a clinical research is done, and it has been shown that this is actually working, we now take that into what is called a standard of care. And we'll talk about very briefly about the standard of care in a minute, of how the standard of what you think, the prescription that you get, and we take it for granted. That particular prescription of a particular drug has taken years of development, rigorous oversight, testing in the laboratory, testing on humans, before a physician can actually prescribe it to you. So what is clinical research? Is basically those three red things. To look at any product, which could be a drug, it could be a device, it could be a diagnostic test, it could be anything. Looking at any of these products to look at their safety and effectiveness. Remember, we are using this in humans. And sometimes some of those drugs are also used in animals. So it's being used on living beings. So we have to make sure that they are safe and they are effective. And that is what clinical research is, period. There's nothing more or nothing less to it. Now, well, it would seem to you that it is very easy, what I just told you. I probably gave you an impression that perhaps it is like Monica just said, a walk in the park or a day out. Well, that is not exactly what it is. And I'll give you an example of what happens. So in the drug discovery process, let us say a company starts with a product with 1,000 different varieties compounds. In the testing phase, those are actually in the drug discovery process, which is in vitro, and in the preclinical testing, which is actually in animals. You go from 10,000 to now you are down to 250 compounds. And this is not an exaggeration. In fact, in majority of them, you start with 10 or 20,000 and you are left with 50 or 60 compounds. So you start with a very large cohort of compounds, and then come to, when you go to clinical, you are actually now working with a very low number. This process in itself takes about 6 to 6.5 years. Then once this particular compound has been found, they go to the FDA and say, hey, FDA, we would like to test this in humans. FDA looks at it. They have got an independent group of individuals who actually review it. And then they come up with, say, okay, of these 250 compounds, we actually give you permission to use 5 compounds. So you started with 10,000, ended with 5, which are going into clinical testing. And you do various phases of studies, and then you end up and you come up with a single compound. You go back to the FDA and say, this is what the results is, and then they approve that particular single compound. So you start with 10,000 and you come up with one in a period of about 10 to 12 years. This is how much time it takes. Not to talk about the fact that now you have about over $1 billion that have been spent on actually each prescription, each drug that is actually out there. Okay, so it is a very rigorous process that actually goes into developing a particular drug. Now, just to briefly tell you the 4 phases of the drug. So the phase 1 is basically where you test it in healthy individuals. Okay, you bring in some healthy individuals and say, how is this drug metabolized? How is it absorbed? And you basically do that particular testing. Okay, in phase 2, you have a much larger number of people, but you are actually right here. You are testing for some efficacy, but more importantly, side effects. Okay, in a larger cohort, you have already determined what the dose is going to be, and you select 2 or 3 doses and you actually test them in humans. The third is that you actually now have a much larger cohort of patients, but now you're testing for both effectiveness and safety. Is it effective? Now, these are the diseased individuals in which you are testing it. Very strict inclusion criteria, who can get into the study and who cannot get into the study. And once it is approved, it is not over. Because there is something called phase 4 review, where even drugs that are approved by the FDA, sitting on the counter, you pick them up all the time and use them, they are actually going through a continuous monitoring process. Okay, so the process of actually doing clinical research, of developing new drugs, of developing new devices, developing new tests for diagnostic purposes is a very, very rigorous process. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, I don't know why this guy is even talking to me about this, because it doesn't concern me. Okay, it does. How many of you have used this particular drug? Correct? Well, this particular drug that you have used have actually gone through the same process and continues to be monitored for side effects. Side effects on healthy individuals, side effects on individuals on the fetuses, on people who are pregnant, who are people with vulnerable population, older age, people who have other diseases, who are also using Tylenol or Advil or any of the other painkillers. This particular process is an ongoing process. Why? Because FDA wants to ensure, and we want to ensure as healthcare providers, that if we are prescribing this to you, that we know precisely what outcome we are anticipating. So why is clinical research important in the Valley? Okay, now we have talked about what clinical research is. I gave you a sort of a brushstroke of what it is, but let's more focus now on the Valley. The effect of drug is highly dependent on the genetic makeup. Okay, how the drug is absorbed, how the drug is metabolized, how the drug is excreted, is highly dependent on the genetics of an individual. And before I leave, I'll prove it to you that this is indeed true. Nothing but facts, critical thinking. More than 90% of the residents of the Valley are of Hispanic ethnicity. We have already talked about it. Okay, how many over here actually are of Hispanic ethnicity? Raise your hands. Almost close to 100%. Okay, so you can just imagine that I'm talking about you and your family. I'm not talking about some abstract group of individuals. I'm talking about you. However, less than 1% of the Hispanics are actually engaged in clinical research. Less than 1%. What does that mean? That means that you have relegated the responsibility of actually doing this particular clinical trial and its usefulness in Hispanics, in you and your family, to another ethnicity, to someone other than non-Hispanics. And you said, okay, if it is good for them, it's good for us. Ask yourself, is this what you want? That if it is good for African Americans, or if it is good for Caucasians, or if it is good for Asians, or any other minority or majority, that it is good enough for us? I think that is where we have the biggest disconnect between the Hispanics understanding that this is their responsibility to actually get engaged and involved in clinical research to make sure that the drug that they are consuming, that their loved one is consuming, that their grandparents are consuming, have actually been tested with people who have Hispanic ethnicity. And then using drugs that have been, as I said, majority of you are using drugs that have not been tested in Hispanics. I can assure you of that, because I'll show you some data that's going to convince you that indeed that is true. And please, I want to make sure that you understand, this is an extremely important message that we want to convey to you. That getting engaged and involved in clinical research is extremely important to make sure that what you and your parents and your loved ones are actually consuming in the form of drugs, devices, or diagnostic tests have actually been tested in your gene pool. This is extremely important. So I'll give you an example of a drug called warfarin or Coumadin. Here are the diseases in which, or conditions under which this particular drug is actually given to individuals. It actually is also called a blood thinning agent. It makes sure that your blood is not actually, your platelets are not coagulated together. It's called blood thinning agent. Okay? People use it. Does anyone of your family member use this drug? Okay, they probably do, and you should take some notice of this, because about roughly every 1 in 5 person in the United States is actually above the age of 60 is in some form of blood thinning agent. So this is warfarin. Now look at this particular, I'm not going to go through this science of this, but this is just an illustration that this is from the FDA, that the weekly dose in African American should be somewhere close to 44 or 45 milligram, weekly dose. Okay? Now, if you were to in order to maintain the appropriate effect of warfarin, now if you gave that dose to a Hispanic, that particular individual is going to bleed to death. And if you gave that dose to an Asian, the moment you turn around, you better write a death certificate, sign a death certificate. Okay, so what we have done, most of what we have of this particular drug has actually been tested in whites, which is Caucasians, and in African American. Very few in Hispanic and very few in Asian. To the extent that FDA was extremely concerned, and they came up with a black box warning that be careful, it may have serious consequences. And that black box warning is actually on the box. And yet, people just consume it as if this is popping a pill and there is going to be no effect. So this is an example where there is a genetic difference in how the drug is actually absorbed and metabolized and therefore used in the body. The key issue for lack of Hispanics getting involved in research, and this is my impression of it, and you may have a different impression, we would like to learn from you as to why Hispanics are not getting involved in research. There's a lack of clear message, and this is why we are partnering with Region 1 in creating clarity about this particular message. Okay? There is mistrust and misconception. Okay, there is mistrust about clinical research to begin with. Okay, and there is also misconception as to what clinical research is all about, and we are hoping that working with you, we might be able to clarify that for you and for your family. There are language barriers and cultural inhibitions. You know this better than I do, how this thing works. There's a lack of awareness. People are not even aware that clinical research is available. COVID-19 did a lot of bad things for the region, but it did one good thing. And the one good thing that it did was that it actually brought to light the fact that without clinical research, we would have had a tremendous tsunami that could have killed many more than it did in this particular valley. And then again, the fact that we have lower socioeconomic status of many of the inhabitants, and also many are uninsured, they also do not go out and seek medical attention. So what are the advantages? The most important advantage is that you have early access to the most innovative treatment option. Let me tell you, research on drugs and devices is only done when it is better than what currently exists. Think about it. If currently Tylenol is the best analgesic that's available, and somebody is testing a new drug, that would actually imply that the FDA felt that this particular drug, perhaps in a certain group of people, or perhaps in a larger population, is actually better than what currently has been approved by the FDA. So it is never that this particular drug is actually worse than what has been currently approved. Now, at the end of the day, it may turn out that this is as good or perhaps even worse than what currently exists. That's a question that needs to be asked. But FDA would not approve a drug for a clinical study if it has not been convincing evidence that this would actually be in a certain group of people, perhaps elderly or vulnerable, pregnant or breastfeeding females, that this particular drug or device or diagnostic test is actually better than what exists at the present time. In cancer, in particular, there is no approved drug. Cancer is all research. So in cancer, everything that we are doing till today is actually in the form of research. The treatment is free of charge. In fact, we actually pay the individuals who, for the inconvenience that may cause for them to get engaged. Now, so think about it. You don't have medical insurance. You have a condition that you want to get treated for. And if that is the case, then the best way to actually get the type of coverage that research does is to get involved in clinical research. And last is, you are participating in advancing medical knowledge. Medical knowledge, not journal. I'm not even suggesting here that you should actually develop medical knowledge which will affect all the people, but at least your own community, the people of Hispanic ethnicity, that it should actually improve the knowledge about how the drug is actually used and metabolized. The very important thing, I know of a lot of families who had to disrupt their lives in order to get into clinical research down at MD Anderson or in San Antonio or in Houston or in other places. They had to sell their homes. They had to actually disrupt their family infrastructure. As Hispanics, I know, because my culture and your culture is very similar. We thrive when we are among friends. We thrive when we are among our own community. And to actually disrupt and take that particular person away from their own community, from their own profession, from their own job, is a huge undertaking. And so you can actually get clinical research done here at home now that we are actually in existence. And then the most important thing is that we are actually validating. If it says in Caucasian, this particular drug is safe and effective at a particular dose, we are validating that in the Hispanic community, that yes, even in Hispanic community, this is actually happening. So the 3 or 4 takeaways that I want to walk away with. 1, initiating and conducting a research is a very rigorous process. Okay. I don't care what Google doctor says, or what, unfortunately, I'm using a political term here, what the right-wing media says. But clinical research and anything that is coming out of science is actually a very rigorous process, and we should take it seriously. Number 2, essentially, when the standard of care, let us say that you go in and you have diabetes, and you have been prescribed metformin or one of the drugs to treat diabetes, and unfortunately are not responding. What do? The physician tells you, listen, you're not responding to any of the drugs that I have given you to control your blood glucose. Maybe you should get on this particular trial so that we can see if this particular drug is going to work. It has not been approved by the FDA for standard of care, but it has been approved for clinical research. So when standard of care fails, that's where the clinical research comes in being. And last but not the least, Do not think of clinical research as if this is some testing of some drugs on you. It's actually advanced clinical care. That is what clinical research is. And many of you have come back to me and said, well, we don't want to be a guinea pig. Think about it. You're okay with a Caucasian and an African American to be the guinea pig and use whatever evidence has been obtained from them for your own treatment, where you know that this may not even work, and you consider that to be okay? So there is a lot of self-reflection that has to be done by us and by the community as to how we are going to get more engaged. And what I would say this is that you are actually a research hero, not necessarily a guinea pig. You are blazing the trail, as they say. You are creating new opportunities to know more about how this particular drug, device, or diagnostic test works in a Hispanic community. I would like to just very quickly for you to very briefly, I'm going to talk about the research institute that we have established here. And then also some members of the team that are part of the research, although some are back in the institute taking care of the patients and doing some clinical research, but some members are here and I would like to invite them to come over. So can I have you please come over? So this is a group of individuals who have devoted their life to help you, to help your family, and to help this community. None of them are actually working here because they need a paycheck. They can get a paycheck anywhere they can go. Each one of them is an accomplished individual who can actually work in any organization in this particular country, any organization in this country. Standing to my left is Dr. Lisa Trevino. She's the vice president for operations. This is a lady who was born and raised here, went to Baylor College of Medicine, went to St. Jude's, is a geneticist by training, came back to the region to serve you, the community. You already know about Dr. Monica Betancourt Garcia. She's now the scientific director for our Trauma Level 1 research program. She also runs our BioBank. Again, someone who was born and raised here, went and got her MD and came back to serve you. And I can go through, and I'm not in any way minimizing the rest of the team, each and every one of them. I mean, I'll give you an example. Some of them have actually been in organizations such as UT Southwestern. Where's Caitlin? Frank? These are individuals who came from Dallas, came back. Okay, Frank was not even part of the region. Caitlin pulled him in. Caitlin is one of those individuals who was born and raised here. Wanted to come back because she wanted to serve this particular community. You can see the dedication. You can't see the faces of these individuals because they are wearing their masks, but you can see the dedication that these individuals have. There are more than 160 clinical trials going on at the present time here. No need to go to Houston. There is no need to go to San Antonio. It's happening right here. It's being done by individuals standing right in front of you. And tomorrow when we will call in the rest of the individuals also because somebody had to be there back in the institute. They actually stayed for 24/7 during the COVID catastrophe, provided services to the entire region, not just to DHR. From Laredo all the way to Falfurrias. We were actually involved and engaged in providing with plasma, then with monoclonal antibodies, and then with all the new strategies that came along for COVID-19. We have the largest liver research program. Guillermo, Frank, who else is here? Hiram, where is he? Oh, Hiram. Adrian. Adrian is here? Okay. We have got all these people who are actually engaged and involved with the liver program. We have personalized medicine program over here. where is Victoria? Victoria is actually involved in a program where we are testing out a particular drug that people use after coronary artery disease commonly. And she's actually finding out if this is actually working in Hispanics or not, in our population or not. Okay, so these are the kinds of studies that we are doing to help you, to help the community, and to help your loved ones. The only thing we are requesting from you is help us. Help us transmit this message to your family, to your friends. You have a sphere of influence. Use it, please, and help us move this agenda forward. Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm going to share with you very quickly a video of a patient who's from the region, who got engaged and involved in research. It's a 2-minute video, just to give you an idea of what a patient's perspective is or I wouldn't call her a patient, I would call her a research subject. Her perspective was in getting involved in research.
So something that I learned about clinical research is that it's something not to be intimidating, or it's something that is not scary, just because the doctors and the staff and the specialists are very experienced, and so they were able to answer my questions and any doubts that I had. So my idea about clinical research before participating was something daunting, just because this was my first study that I participated in. But again, the staff was very helpful, and the doctors as well, they answered all my questions. And then afterwards, my opinion about it is something that I want to continue doing, just because participating in research advances treatment and also helps with finding cures for diseases. It was very easy to participate in this study because the Research and Development Institute did a great job in announcing the study at the university. They announced it on TV and commercials, as well as on the radio, and their contact information was readily available. I was treated very well at the Research Institute because everyone was so pleasant and everyone was so welcoming. This was my first time participating in research, so I was very nervous and I had a lot of questions, but again, the doctors and the staff were very welcoming and they answered all my questions.
So this is a real patient, probably a neighbor of one of you, or lives in the same block or same neighborhood, or maybe even friends with you and your family. So we are not talking about distant, we are talking about very near, somebody who's very close to us. So use this opportunity to go back and let your family and friends know how important it is to get engaged in research. And that, by the way, the drug that you are taking may actually not be tested in people with Hispanic ethnicity. Thank you very much.